Blender Lesson 1.
This video contains 5 parts.
What is Blender and how to obtain it? Using Blender on Mac and PC. Installation. Safety tips. Basic navigation. Part 1. What is Blender? Blender is a free program you can install on any computer. You can use Blender for modeling 3D objects and characters, animating 3D objects and characters, animating 2D animation, editing video. Do you need to know how to draw or animate to use Blender? No, you do not. Do you need to know computer programming or be a computer-savvy person to use Blender? No, you do not. Do you need to know math to use Blender? No, you do not need to know math to use Blender. Do you need to have a very expensive computer to use Blender? No, you do not. Almost any computer will do, even an old one. Blender is free. You can download it for Mac, PC, or any other systems at blender.org. It can be used with very old computers with old operational systems or new computers with recent operational systems. It is safer, however, for your hardware to use recent hardware with recent operational systems such as Windows 10. If you have an old computer, you can still use Blender. On the website blender.org, you can find older versions of Blender and install it. Installation of Blender will be as any standard installation. You can even use Blender with Linux. I recommend watching the full video before installing Blender. Number 2. Using Blender on Mac and PC. The first time I ever installed Blender was in 2010 on a 2006 MacBook Pro. I only made 3D objects. I did not make any animation. The work was light for the computer. Everything went well. Mac computers contain graphic cards which allows you to install Blender easily. PC will require a graphic processing unit, GPU, for Blender to run. However, there are hack tutorials on YouTube that will teach you how to run Blender on PC without a graphics card. This hack is risky, particularly because your computer will be less performing, but if I didn't have a graphics card on my PC, I would take that risk. The second time I installed Blender was in 2014 on an Air Mac. Everything went well. I only modeled a little bit and made very light animation. Everyone who uses Blender must count on doing heavy work on Blender. It's better to assume you will make your computer work hard and take all necessary precautions to be ready for this type of work. Blender is a heavy-duty program in terms of memory usage and mathematical calculations done by your computer. In this video, you will learn how to take important precautions to make your system run better and safer when you're using Blender. Now, in the year 2022, I hear Mac computers with the M1 chip run quite well with Blender. I've never heard any complaints, and Mac is now approaching the Blender Institute. It seems they have some plans together. However, now that I use Blender heavily, I would not use Mac for making Blender animations. If my hard drive is damaged by the heavy work performed by the program, it is quite cheap to replace it. I save everything I make on an external hard drive every day. That way, if my internal hard drive breaks because of the heavy work, it would be quite cheap to replace, and all the other parts of my computer have never been damaged by the heavy wear and tear of Blender. The motherboard, the CPU, the electrical power unit, the graphics card, and the case have never been damaged by heavy use of my PC computer. If an internal hard drive breaks on Mac, you can only imagine how expensive it would be to replace. Nowadays, I only use Blender on PC. At the end of this tutorial, I will give you a formula to build your own inexpensive, quite cheap PC computer for use with Blender. Number 3. Installation. Go to blender.org and look for the version of Blender that suits your computer. Install in a standard way. It is quite easy. Number 4. Safety tips for use. Once you install Blender, you can open the program. The interface you will get is this. This basic interface is called Layout. There are several different interfaces for Blender, all at the top of the window. For beginners, the Layout interface is the best one. Before you commence navigation, that is, to move on the 3D space around the cube, you need to pay attention to a very important element that will make the memory work on your computer much lighter. On the upper right-hand side of your Blender interface, you will find a section that will later serve as a collection place for all your 3D models, lights, and characters called the outliner. Just below, you will find a list called the Properties window. On the left-hand side of that window, you will find several small icons that contain special sections. The first one from the top to bottom is called Active Tool and Workspace Settings. The second one, just below the Tools section, is called Render Properties. It is represented by an icon with the back side of a camera. Click on that camera picture and you will find the first section from the top down where you can select the render engine. There are Eevee and Cycles as the two main sections. For beginners, I recommend to use Eevee. The next section below, Render Engine, is called Sampling. This section displays a default value of 64. This number will determine the quality of rendering of your animations or still pictures resulting from Blender. The higher the value of this number, the better the quality. However, for beginners, 64 is an astronomically high number. I have found that lowering this default value to 5 makes Blender work smoother and faster while I model elements and animate. Adding lights makes your projects quite heavy too. I recommend to add very few lights in the beginning of your Blender experience, and little by little add more, checking how much faster or slower your system works as you add lights. On Eevee, you should do some modeling and animation and little by little pull the sampling render value higher, experimenting with still images and see how much better your render output looks the higher you go, but being careful about how your computer is performing at the same time. On PC, you can go to Task Manager and from there check the performance graphic to see how much work your computer is working. It's easy to see how much your computer is working while you use Blender. If the project starts slowing down too much, when you move the viewport around the objects and everything slows down in general, on your workflow, that means the project is getting a little too heavy for your computer. Blender may crash here and there by automatically shutting down. That is no problem. That can happen now and then, and I recommend pressing the Ctrl+S button to save quite often. If your entire computer crashes by being fully frozen and you can't even force quit, then there is a problem, and you must go lighter on whatever work you are making on Blender. I destroyed my own internal hard drive by pushing my computer too hard. It had 4 GB of RAM and a very old system and old hardware. I had to replace the hard drive and kept one working. In Cycles, go to Render Properties. From there, go to Sampling. From there, go to Render. From there, go to Max Samples and lower the value from 4096 to 5. This will make work lighter for your computer and quicker for Blender. When you're ready to render still images and animated sequences, you will have to pull the value up little by little until the render result is satisfactory for you. As you pull the value higher, the computer will work more. The moment when Blender needs to be light is when working on it. When you're rendering, the system is not working so very hard. Still, it is better to leave all the computer memory space free when doing final rendering. When working on Blender, it is also better to close all the other programs so that your computer can direct all its memory capabilities to render. I installed a 32 GB RAM memory card in my computer in order to watch and listen to videos while I work on Blender. I even experimented rendering and watching movies at the same time, and those 32 GB work quite well for that. Both functions are going at the same time, then the computer is fine. This I could not do with my previous PC, which I built 7 years ago. It had 4 GB of RAM and a very old CPU. On the Properties window, on Output Properties, you can make the adjustments to output video from your animations. The contents of your timeline, which is the numbers window at the very bottom of your Blender program, are the number of frames that will be output as your full animation. You can decide which number will be the first frame of your animation and the last on the right-hand side of your timeline. There is a stopwatch symbol and the start and end boxes. You can manually enter the desired numbers there. The default number is 250 frames. On the Output Properties, go to Output. The first control bar from the top down is called Output. Click on the folder and select a new place for your animations to be placed. The best way of doing that is to create a new folder anywhere you prefer. In that folder, the video files can go, but it's even better if you make still image PNG sequences on that folder. Creating PNG sequences is lighter work for your computer than rendering video. It is quite easy to compile the PNG sequences to video once you have your animation in a PNG still image folder. You can do that with Blender itself. No need for other video editing software. In Output Properties, click on File Format and switch to FFmpeg Video. An encoding window will appear. Click on it and go to Container. Set Container to QuickTime. There are other settings you can change, but from there, you're ready to render your animation to video. Basic navigation. On the top left-hand corner of the Blender interface, you will find the Edit section. Click on it and go to Preferences at the bottom. Go to Input on the left-hand menu. Go to Mouse. Click on Emulate 3-button mouse. Close the window. From now on, your mouse will respond correctly to the general Blender commands. Place your hand hovering above the Shift button and the Alt button, your other hand on the mouse. Place the cursor on the center of the viewport and press left-click and Shift and Alt at the same time. Move the mouse with this button combination and left-click at the same time. This will allow you to move the viewport sideways and up and down. Press left-click on the mouse and move the mouse while pressing only the Alt key. This will allow you to rotate the viewport in any direction, up and down and sideways. Left-click on the mouse and move it while pressing Ctrl and Alt keys. This will allow you to zoom in and out of the viewport. You can do the same thing by spinning the scroll wheel. If you click on the middle button of your mouse, often containing the scroll wheel, press that, and you can also rotate in 3 dimensions on the viewport. Left-clicking on the cube will allow you to select it. Press Alt-A to deselect. Select the cube and move it by pressing G key on the keyboard. To drop the cube somewhere, press left-click again in the desired area. There are 4 shading modes for navigation. The heaviest one is the rendered mode. This one is to be avoided in the beginning of your Blender learning. The next mode is Material Preview mode. That mode is lighter than the rendered mode, but an even lighter one is Solid mode. This mode is quite light for work. The lightest mode of all is Wireframe Display. This is very quick and light, but you can only do so many things with it. Choose the one you need for specific work. On the top left-hand corner, you will find the Object Interaction Mode box. You can visualize objects in Solid mode or Edit mode. You will learn to use Edit mode when you learn how to model in Blender. Solid mode will show you the more finished visual version of your model. To visualize a fully rendered still image of what the virtual camera is looking at, go to the left-hand corner and click on Render. Then click on Render Image or F12. Save the image as JPEG and close the window to get back to the Blender general interface. This is a formula on how you can build your own PC at home with cheap elements, all brand new. I built a PC for Blender with $600. You can spend a lot more and make a better computer, but if you're interested, here's a little formula to make a modest computer for use with Blender. The motherboard, Gigabyte. The model, B550MDS3H. The computer processor unit, CPU, that I used for this computer is the RYZEN 5600G. This is a Ryzen 5 processing unit. The power unit I use is an EVGA 500BR. This is an EVGA 500 bronze. The case I used is a Corsaire full tower. You can choose from a variety of cases. They just need to be full tower, and modern ones are better than the old ones. This one has only one fan, the one that I used. I suggest that you get at least one extra fan for your case.
The RAM memory card is a 32GB DDR4.
Internal hard drive of your computer can be whatever you want. I suggest that you use a solid-state internal hard drive. I recommend the Kingston brand. With all that, I am using a graphics processing unit, GPU, which is a GeForce GTX 650. This is an old graphics processing unit. The Ryzen CPU does most of the work for me. I found while using this computer that the GPU is only doing 50% of the work, while the Ryzen is doing 100% of the work, and a little bit is done by the RAM. In the case of this computer build, The graphics card mainly allows me to use Blender on this PC that I built. It's more a matter of the software being allowed to run than using a very good graphics card. Of course, if you want to spend more money on the graphics card, that's going to make Blender work a lot better. There are graphic cards that Blender recommends on the blender.org website. The good ones are quite expensive. A computer-savvy person can help you install Windows 10 or 11 on this computer. The motherboard will need to have its BIOS upgraded to be able to handle the RYZEN CPU. Your computer-savvy friend can help you do this with another computer and a flash drive and internet. Once he flashes the motherboard, he can install all the hardware together, install Windows, and you're ready to install Blender.
After many years of knowing Blender, I have only 1 year of experience modeling and animating with the program. I made the following video after 1 year's experience.